Welcome to In Such Linguicatl. This is a podcast about poetic thinking where we share with you a different perspective of the social world. Every episode, we take a topic or a concept and we use the lens of philosophy, psychology, mythology, and art to analyze the wonderful horrors of the modern world.
In this episode, we will explore the uncanny. And the uncanny is one of the nuts at the core of poetic thinking, and it's central to the human experience. Summoning it through poetry and art, through in Xochitl, in Cuicatl, we deal with the uncanny. Why is this experience so relevant still, and where can we see it represented?
My name is Andrea Martinez.
My name is Andrea Celeste.
And welcome to our 11th episode of In Such Linguicatl. It takes us always a long time to come up with the next one because life gets in the way. But I've been looking forward to this episode for, I think, a year, because this was one of the initial ideas that we had for episode 10. And then for another episode, we kept postponing it and postponing it. And we're finally doing it.
Yes, we are.
The uncanny is extremely relevant to me personally as a concept, not only because it was part of my PhD thesis, but also because it's tattooed on my left forearm. So
Siniestra.
Exactly, which is part of Sophocles' play Antigone, which we will talk about later on, and the different translations of that line of the chorus. But before we go back to ancient Greece, maybe Andreita, you can give us the quote of the reading that we both did for today.
Sure. We decided to read Algernon Blackwood's The Wendigo. Well, actually, I decided to end up listening to it in an audiobook, which is also a very nice experience to be an active listener in those proposed images of the author, uncanny images. And I chose this quote because, well, it's almost in the end of the book, but it involves the dream world, which is our 10th episode. We discussed kind of the dream world as underworld or as psychic underworld, and its relation to the uncanny, but we didn't go full depth. And here we would be kind of paving the way to the concept in general, and particularly adding to the whole dream world situation. So for those of you who haven't read or listened to an audiobook of the Wendigo, I think there's a movie, but I didn't go into it anyway. Mm-hmm. For those of you who haven't, well, it's Andreita, you should give that
the introduction.
Yeah, to the Wendigo.
Before I introduction to the Wendigo, I have to say that also the Wendigo is very, very special for me as well, because it was one of the tales that my father used to read to me when I was a child. Now, if you read the Wendigo, you probably realize that this is not a child like a text for children.
No tale is a child's tale. No tale's a child's tale.
Okay, that's also very true. But I remember the Wendigo very well from my childhood because I didn't really understand why it was so scary. But I like, sometimes with horror stories, you feel uncomfortable, you feel fear, but with the Wendigo, it's like this, for me, it's like this whole discomfort in my body. So the Wendigo is named after a fictional myth. I think the story takes place in Canada. And basically, now while we were preparing for the episode, so I'm not gonna remember all the details, but basically it's four, is it, that go into the woods into a camping trip? So it's like
four and their chef, who is the Native American.
Yeah,
that's important.
So it's the nephew, the uncle, so the nephew, the doctor, Defago,
and Frank.
Yeah.
That's the other dude. The other guide.
Right, and they have to cross a river before getting to the area that they want to camp in, and they leave the native behind, whose name I forget now. Do you remember who was the name of the? Sorry,
Punk.
we can. Huh?
Punk.
Punk. They leave him behind in the initial camping site, and they go off to the further into the bush, and they're setting up tent, right, for the night, and how does Defago get lost? Remind me.
Well, the thing is, they hint about from the beginning. This is a kind of horror story. So from the beginning, we get hinted that there's something that in this also wild place that no man treads regularly, not even the natives, and that we might never know its core. In this immersion of nature, something wicked this way may come. It's this kind of general feeling. And they do kind of hint about the Wendigo, but we don't get it until that night. And the thing is that
There's
Defago gets
something, yeah.
called. He gets called by this kind of feminine voice. It reminded me in a way of the sirens, but this voice and that clearly called him, but in a distorted manner. So anyway, Defago leaves the camp, and the boy, who is very interesting and important, he's a student of religion. That's what he does. So this can also explain, or that's part of what the uncle says in the end, that his whole sensitivity to the issue of religion and the encounter of the other could have enhanced his eyes and senses in terms of meeting the Wendigo, which is this primal creature of, how do you say this? Meshed, like Tulu, like meshed with of different parts, like animal-like yet anthropomorphic.
Yeah. So when they hear, I think I read this tale, it doesn't take that long, but like they hear something, and then Defago gets, as Andrea said, out into the bush, and he's taken by this creature who's never really described in the story, and he goes missing. And they look for him, of them, and they find him. They find the footsteps, the is that what they call the footsteps on the grass, and then they see that the steps become further and further apart, to a point where he wouldn't have been able to take those steps himself, right? Our is like what, like a meter or so, and steps are like, so further that it seems uncanny, right? Impossible,
And
because
also, well, the steps of the Wendigo, quote unquote, are kind of
like
hoof-like,
hoofs. Yeah.
but not, you can't pin, they can't pinpoint, or he can't pinpoint the animal. And the Fago's footsteps also become, and I would say that that is
Yeah.
another trait in the uncanny, like the how becoming, how the becoming is uncanny, and is, well, nature as the uncanny has this perfect, this quality, um pristinely, which is nature is constantly, becoming. And I'm
Yeah.
speaking of nature as though if I wasn't nature, but I am sorry, I get attacked by Western thought.
um so there's a lot to unpack there, I think, especially from a Freudian perspective, which I will talk about in a second. But like one of the lines that really always has stuck with me is when Defago, when they hear Defago, right, being carried away the woods by this creature, he says, "Oh, this fiery height. Oh, my feet of fire, my burning feet of fire." And that in itself, like the image that evokes, right? That his feet are burning. He's up in the in some like above the woods in a way. The image said is this like being part of nature, but at the same time not really understanding it. It's something that Freud says is an aspect of the uncanny.
Before getting in depth with the uncanny after this bathe of Wendigo's images, the specific quote that links our last episode and this one is when they meet this man again, who also is wearing like, well, it looks like this is like he's wearing a kind of a mask that will fall off, and again he will become entirely something else in front of them.
Mhm.
So this young man who studies religion is watching him, and he says, "He merely stood still, Simpson. He said nothing. He had not the trained will of the older men that forced them into action in defiance of all emotional stress. He watched them moving behind a glass that have destroyed their reality. It was dreamlike, perverted." So in this sense, it's like, well, like this, like and when something traumatic happens, sometimes our mind goes into this. When reality breaks or reality bites, this kind of uncanny that in our um, worlds of filters, it kind of is like a filter of glass of something that it's kind of far away yet right here, like through a looking glass as well. And in that sense, this kind of perversion of reality, which is reality being super real in a way, that's what breaks reality. I don't know if I'm making sense or not. But that is another quality of the uncanny.
So just to pick up on, like, maybe to expand a bit more, it becomes too real. I think the Wendigo of Algernon Blackwood really represents Freud's description of the uncanny, because it's something. So Freud goes into this exploration of the meaning of the uncanny in different languages, right? Into the etymology of the uncanny and the unheimlich in German. And so at some point there is a over, because unheimlich is unhomely, but the aspect of the homely is included in the word of unheimlich, right? So in some definitions of the unheimlich is something familiar, but that becomes unfamiliar.
Unfamiliar, yeah.
And because it becomes unfamiliar, coming from a place of familiarity, it provokes fear and dread. So I think this is the relationship with the wilderness, with the nature, that is represented in the Wendigo, right? Because like we come from nature, right? If you are going to, like, what you were talking about, Western thought and whatnot, like obviously sometimes we forget, and this is a Western text. We come from nature, and we should be familiar with it, but there is an aspect of nature we never really get to. And then, like, this is also quite Heideggerian, like I can talk about that later as well. But then when we stare at it, there's an aspect that we don't recognize, because it's
Well, because it goes
scary.
directly, it's scary because it threatens our individuality. Because also another um, image that is uncanny, for instance, or for many, is the going back.
Yeah.
And to visit a primal forest is also a way of remembering that in nature or this is another image that we with what we relate to nature, nature's boundaries, if you go as primal as you go, which is also like the going back. It's us being animals, for instance, us not recognizing certain human traits that we now hold dear that nature wouldn't. Its boundaries are other or none. So the going back is threatening to us
It's
because
sorry.
it goes to oneness. It's also uh, what they fear in Defago, which is he became something more primal, more that looks like something else that is not me, for instance. And me becoming something else that I don't recognize is truly terrifying.
It's funny that you say talk about the destruction of the individual, because not only that it points towards Freud's Uncanny, but there's a part in the story where one of the characters says, the Wendigo is simply the call of wilderness personified, which some natures hear to their own destruction, right? So it implies the destruction of the self. And I think part of the explanation of Freud's Uncanny, it's not only this like something that was meant to be hidden and then reveals itself, right? So maybe what reveals itself is the possibility of one's own oneness or destruction, and that in itself, that possibility is dreadful. But also, and this is something that I think is also part of the Wendigo, is like Freud talks about the uncanny in terms of omnipotence of thought, right? And so if you think about the obsessive thought that like they describe when they start looking for Defago, and they're just going around in circles and they're always ending up the same place, it's like they're stuck within this one thought, right? And the more they stick to the thoughts, the more fearful they become of the possibility of what will reveal itself.
Well, but also like this, and I would still point the same bridge, which is it's about the destruction of how it threatens my oneness, my wholeness, my wholeness. I don't want to be unholy in the sense of being whole, and the encounter of, but by myself, the encounter with this nature that can be also like the dented vagina, for instance, and the cave. So all other images that we've talked in previous episodes, but it's this fear of if I go inside there, I might unbecome.
I mean, I think so. There's different aspects, right? Like there is this, like, as we said, the fear of the merging, right? Of the marriage, which is also aspect of psychopathy, right? The fear of merging into the whole, right? Of disappearing. Yeah. And that in itself is an uncanny experience. And we've talked about also the relationship of the uncanny with nature, and how the lack of familiarity brings about this fear. But also I think you want to talk about, but and Freud mentions another aspect of uncanny experience is unintended repetition, which I think is something that maybe you can talk about in terms of mirrors. Is that what you were thinking?
Well, yeah, the repetition in general, the going around in circles, for instance,
Yeah,
in the Wendigo, and of course the mirror as a theme, for instance, in poetic thinking, and also how we've we also find it in psychopathology, for instance. People, there are a lot of delusions or hallucinations in psychotic breakdowns that people see themselves in the mirror and the mirror image does something different. There is
like
nothing.
Twin Peaks.
Yeah, like Twin Peaks, of course. David. Actually, I was thinking that Defago coming back reminded me in a way of the. It's not the fireman. No, the. Oh Jesus! In Twin Peaks season 3, forgive me, I'm butchering this. Uh, the guys that say "got a light,"
Oh
got a,
yeah. Got a light, and then it's just repetition. Yeah.
yeah, got a light.
What's the name of Kyle MacLachlan in Twin Peaks? Detective.
Special Agent Cooper.
Oh, Cooper. Yeah, but like that mirror, and I think Lynch is like an inescapable reference of the uncanny, right? Like this guy, like the fireman, like that scene of.
Yeah, it's not the fireman because the fireman is
Oh,
another dude.
sorry. Yeah.
Or the lumber. It's something to do with. Oh, forgive us, whoever listens to us that loves Lynch as much as we do. We've just forgotten this.
Mhm.
Anyway, but also the whole doppelganger situation in the Black Lodge, for instance, that is part of what's uncanny. You know, Special Agent Dale Cooper is un bombón, as we say in Spanish, and because he's so good to everyone and everything. And of course, his doppelganger looks like him,
Mhm.
but it's uncanny,
And this play, like if you look at
Or
the.
sorry,
Mhm.
or the Laura, the famous Laura La La La,
Palmer.
that it's Laura Palmer, where she uses her hands for those who can't watch me or whatever what I'm doing, and that the man in red says she is my cousin. She looks like Laura Palmer, but she's not Laura Palmer.
And I think if you
Um,
want to transport that to everyday experience, right? Like I don't know if that's ever happened to people, but sometimes you catch your reflection on the glass and you don't recognize yourself because for a second you don't like it there is like a lapse of time between looking at the image and recognizing the image as that of you, and that moment.
Also,
Yeah.
yeah. You go, but well, sorry for interrupting, but the same works for the repetition of the image in like a mirror maze
Hmm.
or just a couple mirrors set aside. They say that at the seventh reflection, because seven, of course, is a magical number, the you, it's not you. It's like your doppelganger. That's it. Like, and if you see far, because you're almost unrecognizable, but it's that image that you're seeing here up front. So it becomes this
And this
uncanny.
fear of seeing that image do something that you're not doing, right? Like,
Yeah,
if
in
you get
that
into
way.
that chain of thoughts, then like the experience is like fearful. It's
Well,
uncanny.
the movie, Jordan Peele's movie, Us. Have you watched that? I should have told you to. We should have watched that,
No, I
but
haven't watched it, but I've heard of it.
it's good. Round standing ovation for Lupita Nyong'o's deep guttural voice. There,
Oh
she
no, I
has.
have watched it. I did. It's a horror film, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
but that's the thing. Like, there's a world for you that haven't watched it. I'm sorry, I don't believe it's spoilers, but the movie suggests a world underground made
Mhm.
of some sort of intelligent agency or something like this that have doppelgangers of people of San Francisco, at least.
Mhm.
And well, they live in underground. But anyway, the big image of that's in the trailer even is of this little girl in this mirror maze in the horror kind of. No, it's actually like a theme park or a theme game at the beach that suggests like uh a trip to like to the underworld or to knowing yourself. I'm sorry, I will wish I
I
should
can't.
it.
I can't remember. Yeah.
Well, but it suggests something like of a inner journey, or of a
Mhm.
quest, a subjective quest. So the girl goes in and there's a mirror maze, and then she's looking at herself, and then herself does something else.
Mhm.
And the doppelganger, well, I won't say anything, but the revelation in the end, it's very, very, very interesting. I will, because I don't believe in spoilers. The doppelganger leaves with the parents.
Ah, yeah.
The original, quote unquote, stays in, she takes her, the doppelganger takes her to the underworld, and she forgets almost how to speak. So that's when we see this amazing scene of Lupita Nyong'o speaking of how these doppelgangers have been tricked by fate or what have you, which is in itself uncanny. You know, like you're an automat, kind of more like an automat gaining consciousness or
Mm-hmm.
wanting life and wanting your life.
Mm-hmm.
That also proves uncanny.
And just going back to this, like, in relation to the uncanny, the repetition and identity and mirrors and stuff. Another experience that I can think of that is uncanny is open casket funerals, but behind glass. Like when the corpse is like under glass, right? But it's open casket. And then when you see the person when they're like obviously dead in the coffin, and the last time you saw them alive, right? And that like that's transformation, I suppose, of looking at them. And then like obviously this is why open casket funerals are a thing, because it makes the people in the funeral see the reality of what has happened, right? You can't escape it. But the moment looking, like, when people go up to the coffin in Catholic societies to say goodbye, like that experience of looking at the person who was once living behind the glass, I think can sometimes be uncanny in that terms of like the reality that you were talking about before becomes
Of
too
course,
real.
because when Freud also talks about the familiarness of things, it's also like these um uh limítrofes. How do you say this in English? Without a boundary, that you don't know, the boundary is unclear, you don't
Liminal.
know. Liminal, you don't know if it's animated or not. And then when you see a dead person, it becomes so real
Yeah.
because there is no way it moves. So the fear
Mm-hmm.
also becomes what it began to have life. It would be obvious
Yeah.
and terrible, terrifying.
Terrifying.
So, well, and to continue with the repetition and the doppelganger, the mirror, as uncanny, which is candy for our poetic selves. In a
Mm-hmm.
way, we enjoy the experience of the uncanny, and we summon it, as we were saying in the beginning, even though it frightens us, because as we believe it's at the core of our beings. But anyway, it's funny that this is our episode 11, because 11 in itself has kind of a repetition. And also,
And 11, I think, is a significant number also in Hinduism, I think,
well, in
because it's the
some,
letter. Well, you sorry, go on. I'm not
it's
sure.
a,
I can't remember, but there is
well,
this.
what I know of, which is like the some numerologies, that they go from 1 to 10, they're decimal numerologies, but there are others that go from 1 to 11, and 11 is the last one, because it's this, well, yes, like the one
The
looking at the
mirror.
left, yeah, the mirror.
Mhm.
And how 11, 22, 33, 44, this kind of, if you add 11, you always have the mirror,
What was
which,
it, Andreita? Was it in the movie Waking Life when the time is always 11:11?
no, in waking life, what they say is that in dreams you can't really look at the time, because
I
it
feel like
moves.
there's a movie or something where it's like the time 11:11 has like something, but I can't remember which movie it is.
I'm sure, as in horror films, it's like the 343 situation or 333
Yeah.
or two, like this kind of stuff. And most of these horror films kind of have this psychopathological explanation to them, as the uncle in the Wendigo, who is the doctor, says, when he sees his young nephew coming in and going, like, telling this crazy story about his companion guide, the doctor says, well, chillax, go to bed. And he thinks like this,
Yeah.
even the smell can be explained
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
being a hallucination, like
Yeah.
anyway. There are another, well, there's a movie, the Jesus. In Spanish is Las Manos del Diablo. Oh, Bruno and I, a friend of mine and I, we always talk about this film with
What is
Matthew
it about?
McConaughey
Okay.
and Bill Paxton, and I'm not remembering who else, but anyway, his father claimed that God had spoken to him, and with his hand, a particular hand, he would cleanse the world. So this, and to one of the brothers, this is uncanny because it also speaks of how, because the father is insane and talks about how his hand, it's not his hand, it's the hand of God. And that also threatens the wholeness. I am not whole. I am partly this, or my father is partly God and will use, and God through his hand will annihilate me, whatever, if I am a bad soul. And also in Hamlet, I don't remember if the spurious king, murderous king, Claudius, um, says that it's his left hand, but regardless, he does speak to the hand that kills his twin son, not son, I'm sorry, brother, um, and as the criminal one, like I didn't do this. It was this bloody hand that did it.
And I think,
And
like, again, it has to do with this, like, wholeness versus parts, right? Because there was I think a radio show that in Mexico, like in the early 90s, late 80s, that was called The Hair, La Garra Peluda.
oh
And
yeah,
it was based in a story about like a claw, like the, I don't know, the
like the
claw,
monkey's paw
like the monkey's paw, right? And then it would move by
that moves.
itself, and that imagery of the hand being separated or from a body and having its own motion was like it's an uncanny vision, right?
Yeah, and this, you make me think also about voodoo and all this kind of stuff. Like, with a part of you,
Mm.
I can make a voodoo doll and hurt you wholly.
Yeah.
Um, and well, I also was thinking in more secular terms, or the our yes, or how religion has snuck under secularity, which is the keeping of a journal or the passing of time in a calendar. How we have, uh, from our particular lives, before it was only calendars for the whole organization and cosmological workings of the whole community. But now, as the democratic age throve, it also becomes the way of me giving order to my life, and how sometimes that can also mingle with the uncanny, in terms of how one makes a fixation in a date, in a particular date, not only your birthday, but even your birthday, because on your birthday you remember your life, and how maybe last year you with a person that now you're not, or whatever it is. And this remembrance becomes uncanny, and you can be in a state, and when you when certain anniversaries, let's say, come up, that even you don't want to hold dear, but just the passing of time falls again in this ordering that we call the calendar.
Mm-hmm.
And now again it's a certain date. You can be in a state kind of well, yeah, of of the uncanny, because of you remember, and memory can, well,
Can be dreadful.
dreadful. Yeah, I was thinking how in the Wendigo, that's what I was going to go into. I was drifting at the moment. But in the Wendigo, this also is exposed. There is a moment where Defago, uh, the narrator describes the inner trip he's having in terms of smell.
Mm-hmm.
And he asks the young man, like, have you
Yeah.
smelled anything? And he says, no. And he ponders, well, maybe it was what I was remembering with the song I was singing.
Yeah.
Took
Yeah.
me to this particular state where I remembered something that I didn't want to remember. And
Yeah.
now
You just made me think about like which I experienced as uncanny as well. My first boyfriend when I was 14 wore CK1 cologne.
oh, that happens all the time. Yeah.
Like,
Also
and
hearing.
sometimes like it's like, I mean, he wasn't really important in the sense of like, love or significance, but it was obviously it was a first of sorts. And so whenever I catch the scent of CK1, my mind just goes in automatic there, and I don't want it to go there. So it's a little bit like disconcerting. And just one more note on the memory stuff and the connection with the past. I think, for example, if you wrote journals as a child, which I have kept since I was like 11,
Yeah, me too.
much to my own misfortune, when I dare to look at them, like, and I read what I wrote, I don't recognize the person. And I think obviously the obvious answer is like, well, because it's not the same person, and the illusion of continuity is in itself an illusion. The continuity of identity is an illusion. But as Freud says, the uncanny brings about or uncovers something that should remain hidden in theory.
Which is my old self, I guess, in that sense, because
Or the revelation that there is no continuity.
well, of course, because that's, you read these things, and at the best of times they are comical, but at the worst of times they are uncanny. And what also reveals is, yes, how much I am not that, and that is uncanny, because one believes that one can be whole.
Well, that one can trace back
Yeah.
how one got here.
Yes, and that also reminds me of what I was saying at the middle of the episode in terms of how the going back is uncanny, and that's in a way one of the fears in Western civilization. And I will use Plato as an example, that he would say, "We, there's nothing for me to learn." I am obviously paraphrasing. There's nothing for me to learn in the wild.
Mm-hmm.
Or everything that is worth learning, it's in the polis, in the city, between my equals. So
Mm-hmm.
I will not go speak with that other that
Mm-hmm.
reminds me of this other form of life, which is also represented by females in ancient Greece.
Yeah.
That is why women had, zero rights in general, and that's
Mm-hmm.
where it all started, because we've been linked to this
To nature, to the wilderness. Yeah, yeah,
beforeness. So
yeah.
if they become feminine, they are kind of going back into something. So, and then just in the going back situation, not because that's uncanny, but because it just popped into my head, the derviche um, turn,
Yeah.
what it wants to achieve is to go back to when we were one
Yeah.
this kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
that's
for, of
cool.
course, for Westerners, uh, and that's what New Age wave wanted to fight against, uh, is very threatening.
Hmm.
No, we're two. I look at you. I am not this.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Go ahead.
no, no, no. Yeah, that's it. The idea of going back until we're one, it's kind of scary.
Just to point out to a different well, not massively different interpretation of the uncanny, but it's relevant to the explanation of the tattoo. I'm going to jump to Heidegger and then Antigone. Um, and so obviously Heidegger recognizes Freud's explanation and exploration of the uncanny, but for Heidegger, the uncanny refers more to the human experience as anxiety, right? Now I think the more I look back at Heidegger and the uncanny, the more I agree with Freud, um, rather than with Heidegger, because um, Heidegger explains the uncanny, yes, as a at the core of human experience, but in terms of anxiety, he explains it as dealing with the unfamiliar. Because in our public lives, in this police, as you were saying, um, the police or the publicness suppresses everything unfamiliar. Now, you could argue what I was thinking about when I was reading this excerpt again, is that in our current lives, nothing seems unfamiliar because of the rise of Instagram, right? Every corner has been photographed. So I think the risk of having an uncanny experience, even though it's lower, it might be intensified because we don't expect things to be unfamiliar anymore. Do you see what I mean? What do you think?
No, yeah, and actually, I would link the whole journal experience and the remembrance of experience as uncanny as that we were talking about with the Heideggerian perspective, because it gives you existential dread to uh, to live is uncanny in terms because we remember stuff.
Mhm.
If we didn't, as quote unquote animals do, uh, then there is no dread. There is no dread. There is no uncanniness. But I would say, for instance, having dogs now, when I walk with them, sometimes they will see things that haven't been in the road, and they have an uncanny experience. I can
Mhm.
tell because
Mhm.
they don't know if that thing is animated or not. And that's what they.
Right, yeah. I mean, Heidegger, obviously, and I disagree with this part, would argue that the uncanny is only it's only human, right? It only pertains to humanity. But I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily uh the case. But Heidegger does focus on humanity alone for the most part, or human experience.
I hadn't thought about the dog situation until
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
But I think the thing there is obviously we're always speculating. So yes, we will say it is human for now.
So just to go into to connect Antigone, Heidegger, uh and the tattoo that I mentioned at the start. So I have a tattoo of the line of Antigone, the second act of the chorus, which is depending on the translation that you're looking at, but if you're looking at Sophocles into English, one of the translations is many wonders, many terrors, but none more wonderful than the human race or more dangerous. So that one is like includes the ambivalence of both worlds, the wonders and the terrors, right? And the Greek word is deinon, right? Then there's another translation from the Sophocles into English. Numberless are the world's wonders, but none more wonderful than man. Now that one skips the negative. And then we have the Holderlin's Antigone into English, which he monstrous a lot, but nothing more monstrous than man. And then we have Heidegger's translation of the same line, which is manifold is the uncanny, but
Many
not
what?
manifold. Like there are many
Many
is
fold.
uncanny, but more uncanny than man. So we have again, kind of like Freud did. We have with Danon, with the word Danon, we have monstrous, we have wonderful, we have terrifying. And then we have, I think the word that I like that Heidegger chose is the uncanny, to bring it all together, right? Because the human experience and humankind brings both poles, as maybe not necessarily separate, but as part of the same thing, right? Which is the wonderful, the awe-inspiring, but also the monstrous, the
Yeah,
monstrous.
and in that sense, I will also, which is not my favorite play, and I also think that we should see other things than Shakespeare and Hamlet. But there is a part in Hamlet where Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, is speaking to some actors, and he invites these actors to make a play that will show, the unfolding again, or the revelation again, as to the uncle, no, that he knows that he killed his father, but he's talking about the nature of acting.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that we are monsters, who play other things,
Mm-hmm.
because we, in our wholeness that is one, can embody and something else. And in that sense, I will again go to Plato or against him. But that was one of the reasons why he didn't enjoy the theater, because he would say that that was uncanny, and that we should kind of part from that, because the action of acting and of what happens there, of the representation, it it flirts with the otherworldly, like the dead.
Yeah.
That's the first representation, or the first character to be brought to life in theater has to do with the dead.
Mm-hmm.
He or she who is not here anymore, and we want to bring her back to life, to the presence. So that is also what Artaud says, that is why, to the Western world, theater is so threatening, because we representation, or what have you, does these things. He wouldn't use the word representation, but still, it's kind of what it is.
Yeah, and I think, like, just going back slightly to Antigone and Heidegger, although Heidegger does give a tremendous importance to human experience over anything else, I think that line in Sophocles does speak of something that we often forget, because we don't really have any in our day-to-day, maybe, and it also connects back to the Wendigo, right? Because in the Wendigo, his eyes bleed, not only his feet, his burning feet of fire, but his eyes bleed. And the way he explains it is the lust of wandering, and the eyes for the lust of beauty. And the lust of beauty, right? I think that's kind of like what I want to connect this back to the uncanny of humankind, because sometimes we overlook the monstrosity or the magnificence of human experience, not like as better than anything else, but if you think about nature and the encountering of the other, there is no I don't want to say the word reverence, because I don't like that word, but there is no awe. There's no wonder. There's no wonder, right? Which is what the uncanny is meant to inspire, a sense of wonder, right?
Awful. I love that word, because in English, awful, it means that something is, now it means that something is not nice. It was awful. But awful also
Yeah.
is full of
Full of
awe.
awe.
And how awe, which is that actually reminds me of the word in Greek that is supposed to be the verb to see, but the particular to see that you use at the theater, which is eyes wide open, mouth full open, to be in awe of the situation.
And just to bring back Lynch, I recently watched for the first time Inland Empire with Laura Dern and her expressions,
Oh,
right?
I did.
Like the
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I did an essay on that, actually, on her how the gestures of Laura Dern in general, and
the
of
way
course,
her face contorts to show terror, right? Or shock. Like it's just, it's
Uncanny.
uncanny, but I like Lynch is able to accomplish that,
Well,
the
yeah.
embodying of that experience.
I quickly searched the name of the dudes of Twin Peaks, the Gotta Light dudes, and it's even more relevant, of course. They are the Woodsmen.
Ah, yeah, that's cool.
And yeah, that's cool. So it like, yes, it's about these, and they are the ones that resurrect Killer Bob
Mm-hmm.
in the infamous episode 8, where he's been complete shot ton of times, and then these men
Yeah,
come
yeah, that's right.
out of the woods and
Yeah,
start doing a weird ritual to, resurrect him.
yeah.
I'm glad we talked about resurrection and this day of our Lord being Easter
Which
Sunday.
is also uncanny, as we were
Yeah.
saying. Yeah, so today is Easter Sunday. When we're recording the episode, it'll probably come out like in like Labor Day. But
But know that.
um okay, shall
Yes,
we?
I
That's
think
it.
we're good. I think we're
Okay.
good. So thank you for being with us. If you were with us at the end, I think this was going to be a long one.
Maybe not so long, maybe just long enough. So thank you for listening to us. Look for the uncanny out, enjoy it, summon it.
Yes.
My name is Andrea Martinez.
Follow us on our Instagram, Spotify, what have yous. And my
Ixic
name
Podcast.
is Ixic Podcast. My name is Andrea Celeste. We are Uncanny as well. We are two Andreas.
That's
Yay.
true. Yes. We're in such Linguigatl, and thank you for listening.